Lights will guide you home, and I promise I will burn for you, by rayrae118. Chapter 7. Ginny furrowed her brow at the book in Harry's hands. What is it? She asked curiously, putting her quill down. Harry took a seat and opened the book.
It's the 6th year potions textbook, but that's not what caught my interest. This whole book. It's almost like the charms book you gave me last year. You know, the one that used to belong to my mum?
Ginny nodded, and looked as Harry flipped through the pages.
This whole thing is filled with notes. Not just potions notes, either. There's what looks to be invented spells, too.
Ginny leaned over and read with him. There's no explanation for the spells, though, she stated, confused.
Harry nodded. I noticed that. There are a few explanations, like this one.
He pointed to a particular spell. It was just one word. Sectum Sempra. And the description? 4 enemies. Harry furrowed his brow. Do you know who this book belonged to? Ginny shifted in her seat. Harry shook his head.
It doesn't have a name in it, just this.
He flipped the book over to the back cover, where a single sentence was written across the bottom. Ginny frowned. Property of the Half-Blood Prince? What?
Harry shrugged. I have no idea. I don't think we should try any of these spells out until we figure out what they do.
Ginny agreed. They set the book aside. Whom should we tell about this? She asked. Professor McGonagall?
Harry bit his lip. I was thinking Professor Snape, he admitted. He is a potions master, after all. And I don't really trust Slughorn.
Ginny nodded, and they decided to talk to the defence professor before the end of the week. Line break. Classes, prefect duties, Quidditch, and everything else was so intense that it was the next weekend before they were actually able to find some time to speak with Professor Snape in private. Harry told his friends that he and Ginny would join them in the room of requirement in a couple of hours, and left them all there, practicing either occlumency or their animagus forms, or catching up on homework, as he and Ginny made their way down to the dungeons. Harry knocked twice on the door of Snape's chambers, and waited for his brusque "Enter," before he pushed the door open and led Ginny inside. How did you know where his private rooms were? Ginny asked mentally as they shut the door behind them.
Harry shrugged. Would it sound weird if I said that Hogwarts told me?
Ginny pursed her lips, and Harry grimaced.
I know it sounds incredibly strange, but it's the best I can explain it. I really think the castle told me.
Ginny gave a mental sigh. It's probably an Heir of Gryffindor thing, she agreed. Snape looked at the pair of Gryffindors and raised an eyebrow. To what do I owe the pleasure of your company on a Saturday morning? He drawled, keeping the curiosity out of his voice, and successfully conveying a discontent with their company this early on a weekend. Harry swallowed.
Professor, a few days ago Ginny and I were studying, and came across a strange book. I was wondering if you could possibly take a look at it.
Snape frowned and set down the potions journal he had been reading.
Strange how?
He asked, leaning forward and gesturing for them to take a seat. Harry bit his lip and looked back at the door, before turning to Snape again. Understanding the hint, Snape pulled out his wand and cast a few privacy wards, before he gestured for them to speak up once more. Harry pulled out the book and set it on the table. Snape reached forward and picked up the innocent-looking object. His gasp was audible as he flipped through the book, and the 2 students looked at each other confused.
So?
Harry asked cautiously. Snape jerked his head up and looked at the 6th year. Where?
How did you find this?
Harry shared a look with Ginny, and when she nodded he turned back to the professor.
There's a room that we found that can become whatever you want. It's called the Room of Requirement. I asked it for a place to study, and it provided us with a library. I was looking through the books, and I found it. Professor, what's wrong?
Snape took a deep, shuddering breath and set the book down carefully. I am glad you had the foresight to bring this to someone's attention before trying anything written in this book. He swallowed harshly and continued. This was my potions textbook when I was in school. Harry frowned and shifted in his seat, but he didn't speak, since Snape kept going. I told you a few things about my time at school, Harry, and the person who invented some of these spells, he wasn't that concerned with the recipient's welfare. Why does it say property of the Half-Blood Prince on the back? Ginny asked curiously. Snape sighed. My mother's surname was Prince, and as she married a Muggle, that makes me a half-blood. To be honest, I probably wrote that because I wanted to make myself seem more important. Harry bit his lip and his hand finding Ginny's under the table. She squeezed reassuringly. None of the spells had descriptions, so we felt it best not to try any of them out until we can figure out what they did. But I did look through some of the changes you made to various potions in the book. They seemed like they would greatly improve the finished product. Snape nodded, a ghost of a smile making its way to his face. I was always interested in potions. Your mother actually helped me with a few of the improvements. Harry grinned. Really? He always loved hearing more about his parents, especially when it was more than just someone telling them how much he looked like him. Snape's ghost of a smile widened minutely. Indeed. Though she chose to study a charms mastery, she could have easily completed a potions mastery had she wanted to. She was one of the only to truly challenge me in our 7 years at school. We often fought for the top spot in potions in our year. Harry beamed and Snape inclined his head. You have inherited many of her strengths, Harry. If I might make a suggestion, you might want to consider going through your own textbook and seeing if you can find any improvements in potions yourself. Improving already developed potions is the first step. If you have the drive and the desire, eventually you could end up creating your own. Harry blinked, surprised. He hadn't really thought about the possibility of inventing his own potions, but it did sound intriguing. He wasn't sure he wanted to go for a mastery in the subject, though. Snape licked his lips and looked down at the book. If you want, I can go through this with you at some point, and tell you about the spells I invented. Some of them should never be used, but there are others that could come in handy. Harry nodded. I'd like that, he said eagerly. The defense professor chuckled slightly. They spent another hour talking about the book, and Snape taught Harry and Ginny a few useful spells that he had invented, such as Muffliato, which caused those around him to develop a sort of buzzing in their ears. Langlock, a spell that caused the recipient's tongue to stick to the roof of his or her mouth, and Levi Corpus, which caused someone to be hoisted up by their ankle comically. He did, however, warn them against some of the darker spells he had invented, such as Sectum Sempra, which was far worse than the Cutting Curse, and needed a specialized counter in order to reverse the effects. It would cause someone to bleed out quickly if the counter wasn't applied, and Severus was very serious, as he told them that they should never consider using it unless the circumstances were extremely dire. As the morning continued on, the conversation turned into other topics, and Harry found himself telling the professor he had once felt very strong dislike for him about their musings on Voldemort's survival 15 years ago. Snape frowned as Harry voiced their research project. I admit the question has crossed my mind, he confessed. I have never been able to come up with an answer, however. He must have done something to have survived that night. Harry shrugged and nodded. That's what we were thinking. We've been doing some looking, but we haven't found anything yet. He looked at Ginny, and she leaned forward slightly. Professor, we were wondering if you would be willing to help us. Your knowledge would be a huge help, the youngest Weasley reasoned. Snape pursed his lips before he nodded slowly. I will help where I can. Harry smiled. Thanks, Professor. I just know that this is the key to bringing Voldemort down. Snape flinched slightly at the Dark Lord's name, but he didn't comment. Harry hesitated and then continued. We'd appreciate it if you would keep this and any information we discover a secret. Snape nodded, his eyes sharp and probing. You don't want Dumbledore to find out? He observed, his voice emotionless. Harry was the one to flinch this time, but he nodded readily enough. I don't trust the headmaster, for obvious reasons. I don't want to give him an opening. He seems to be under the impression that he's the only one who can lead this war, but he's not doing a great job. Snape snorted, agreeing wholeheartedly. Though his place as a professor didn't necessarily mean he could come right out and say something negative about the headmaster, at least not while in school. Harry smiled slightly, seeing the professor's agreement. He's so wrapped up in his schemes and second chances that he can't see that all he's doing to hurt the war effort and the wizarding world. How many people have to be hurt because he let some Death Eater run off with a warning? Snape raised an eyebrow. Albus is many things, but those former colleagues of mine who were let off the last time around were not afforded that opportunity because of him. Harry nodded understandingly. I know that, he placated. Those parasites were let off because they bribed the right officials. All while our supposed righteous and fair justice system threw my godfather in Azkaban without a trial. Harry's tone was mocking and derisive, but Ginny's grip on his hand calmed him and made him take a breath to calm himself. No, I know what Dumbledore wanted those people locked up. I'm talking about now. He knew that Malfoy is the reason I ended up at the Ministry last June, but he won't take any action. It's only because of Amelia that the prick was suspended. If he continues to send the message that people can get away with whatever they feel like, why would any of them want to change? Snape sighed. I understand your reasoning, and I do agree. Stunners will only go so far. At a certain point, we need to start fighting actively, rather than reactively. Harry nodded eagerly. Exactly. This is what we're doing right now. The key to bringing down Voldemort is in his past. I just know it. Snape could feel the weariness creeping in. What Harry was suggesting made sense, but it also meant a lot of work and effort, with very little hope of a payoff. You realise how much of a wild hippogriff chase this is, right? Harry chuckled at the wizarding take on the Muggle phrase, before he nodded again, this time more soberly. I know. But we have to try, right? This is about ending the war. And, for the first time, I actually feel like that's possible. We have a chance. It won't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever is, right? Ginny smiled and leaned over to give her boyfriend a kiss on the cheek. Very true, she agreed. She looked at the defense professor. We've heard time and again how we shouldn't keep secrets and let the adults handle it. We can't just let the adults handle it, Professor. This isn't your war anymore. It's ours as well. The prophecy is about Harry and Voldemort. He'll be right there in the thick of it all. And I'll be damned if I let him fight alone. Harry smiled softly. We're a team, Gin. You've made that quite clear by this point. Ginny nodded decisively. Too right. We've come to you, Professor, out of curiosity, and because we know we can trust you to help us, and not try to keep us out of it. We plan on bringing in our friends, as well as Sirius and Professor McGonagall, but to be honest, you're probably the only one we knew would treat us as competent adults. Snape frowned. How so? He asked curiously. Harry sighed. Sirius and Aunt Minerva are really good about keeping me informed and making sure I can defend myself. But when it comes down to it, they're my guardians, and their first instinct is to protect me. You, however, are more direct, and more likely to treat us as equals. You expect us to be able to handle it. Snape almost smiled at the assessment, and inclined his head. Very well. I will not tell anyone, and help out where I can. I trust that you will share any information likewise. Harry nodded. We'll work together. If we find anything of interest, we'll keep you informed. As it was almost lunchtime, Harry and Ginny went upstairs to join their friends, deflecting any questions about what they had been doing. They would tell their friends everything, but only after Blaise, Daphne and Luna had mastered occlumency. It would happen soon, he knew. Maybe within the next few months. The rest of the day was spent in the Room of Requirement, with the two Slytherins and Ravenclaw practicing their occlumency, while Harry exercised his legilimency. He was pleased with the progress, both his and his friends. He had managed to briefly get through Daphne and Blaze's shields, but both of them knew he was there and were able to forcefully eject him. Luna's mind just gave him a headache, and he sympathised with Jason, who had had to sit down to regain his footings after testing Harry's defences. That afternoon, Ginny let him in willingly, so that he could attempt to gain some sort of idea of how to navigate someone else's mindscape. She knew what he was trying to do, and supported him wholeheartedly, helping him out where she could. When it was time for dinner, all of them felt mentally exhausted as they trooped down to the Great Hall. Line break. The next week, Snape started them off on non-verbal spells in defence class. As you have all made it to the NEWT class, you should all possess the ability to perform spells without verbal incantations. Pair up. One person firing a silent stinging hex, while the other person attempts to block it with a silent shield charm. There was a flurry of movement as people broke into pairs. Harry found himself pairing up with Susan, off to one side. Ron and Hermione were next to him. Nearby, Neville and Hannah Rabbit were practicing. While Harry had some practice with non-verbal spells, he was the exception. His friends had helped him with the skill before the second task of the Triwizard Tournament, but they hadn't developed the skill themselves. Predictably, at 10 minutes into the lesson, Hermione managed to completely and silently block Ron's whispered singing hex. Harry smiled proudly at his friend, as he waited for Susan to succeed. He was sure she'd get it, if the determination on her face was anything to go by. However, Snape drew their attention before she was victorious. "Disgraceful," he commented. "By this point, you should have all had some success. Perhaps some sort of demonstration is in order." Without even a warning, he turned suddenly and fired off a silent spell, which Harry blocked with ease. Snape's lip curled into something like a smirk, and he fired again. Harry smiled slightly, and blocked the jelly legs jinx, followed by a hair-growing jinx, a toenail-growing hex, and another stinging hex before Snape lowered his wand. 5 points to Gryffindor, he said calmly. The entire room was shocked for several moments, before Snape barked at them to get back to work. By the end of the lesson, Neville and Susan had both had successful and non-verbal spells, while Ron was feeling a little frustrated, though he was determined to get it. Harry promised the class, as they made their way down the corridor, that they would practice at the DA meeting that week, and every week until they all felt comfortable with the new skill. Line break. The first Hogsmeade visit of the term was that Saturday. Harry made plans with his friends to meet up for lunch, before he and Ginny wandered off into the village. They spent most of the morning visiting the various shops. Ginny needed some more parchment, and Harry wanted to check out the bookstore. As they made their way towards the Three Broomsticks, Harry got a niggling feeling in his stomach. He looked around, frowning. Following his lead, Ginny also made herself aware of their surroundings. "What's going on, Harry?" she asked mentally, observing the crowds around them. Harry bit his lip. "I'm not sure," he admitted. "I just feel like someone's watching me." Ginny immediately intensified her efforts, but to her eyes no one was paying them undue attention. Suddenly Harry moved, closing in on an alley between two shops to their right. There was a muffled shout and a yell, and then Harry had his hands closed around the strange man's throat, his wand trained on the ragamuffin. "Air now, let me go!" the man wheezed. Harry made no move to comply. "Why are you following me?" he demanded. The man tried to protest, but it was hard to make out words around the wheezing. Suddenly there were 2 more people there, pulling Harry off of the stranger. Harry tensed briefly before recognizing Remus and Tonks, and relaxing. "We'll take care of this, Harry," Remus placated. "You should join your friends for lunch." "Who is he, Remus?" Harry asked curiously, calming down slightly. Remus sighed, throwing a glare at the scruffy man who was currently withering under the look from Tonks was giving him. "His name's Mundungus Fletcher," the werewolf told Harry and Ginny. "He's part of Dumbledore's order. I believe Dumbledore may have set Fletcher on you as some kind of protection. Or he just wants to keep an eye on you." Remus snorted derisively, before beginning to lead the 2 students back towards the nearby pub. Fletcher couldn't curse his way out of a paper bag, but you didn't hear that from me. He's a lowlife, and the only reason he's not in prison right now is because he knows how to trade in information. He's good at giving up the right information to get his own charges dropped. On the other hand, he's also useful for getting information about the dirty underside of life. I suppose that's why Dumbledore puts up with him. Harry shook his head. He understood the need to have contacts everywhere, but why did Dumbledore feel the need to have him followed? It was just another strike against the old man. He and Ginny said goodbye to Remus and joined their friends at the large table off to one side of the pub. Most of them were already there, and Neville and Hannah joined them as Harry and Ginny sat down. After a filling meal, they were off again, this time breaking up into larger groups. Neville and Hannah joined Blaise, Daphne, Luna and Colin, while Ginny, Harry, Ron, Hermione and Susan went off in a different direction. Susan tried not to let it show how much it hurt to see Neville with someone else. She was happy for him. He was her friend. But that didn't mean she was completely comfortable seeing him date another girl, even if that girl was a good friend of hers. She tried to quash down the annoyance that Hannah hadn't even asked her if it was all right if she went on a date with Susan's ex. After spending the afternoon enjoying the village and the fresh air, they made their way back to the castle, hurriedly eating their supper before heading up for the DA meeting. Line break. The beginning of October came before Harry had even realised it. By the time the month was half over, he was already counting down the days until the Christmas holidays. He had turned down no less than 4 invitations for get-togethers by Slughorn, and he was getting tired of it. He and his friends had all received the same courtesy, but their feelings were on par with Harry's. They didn't attend any of the parties either. After the first 2, Harry made a point of scheduling Quidditch practices for any night Slughorn planned a party for. It would give him a ready-made excuse to say no. It also provided one for Ron and Ginny, which made them very happy. October was quickly coming to a close, and Harry found himself thinking about Halloween. He realised ruefully that he and Ginny were coming upon their 2-year anniversary. They hadn't celebrated last year, as Harry had been too preoccupied thinking about the anniversary of the deaths of his parents. Slughorn had put together another party for Halloween night, and managed to corner Harry on his way out back to the common room one evening, the week beforehand. Harry regretted being alone, but the others were doing homework, and Harry had just gone to talk to Minerva about some DA things. The professor expressed his disappointment that Harry had been unable to join them so far, and hoped he would see them that evening. "After all, you can't very well have Quidditch practice that late when it's dark out, right?" He chuckled humorously. Harry shrugged. "I already have plans for that night, Professor. I'm sorry that I can't make it." He didn't wait for a reply and hurried towards the common room. On the last day of October, Harry and Ginny separated from their friends before dinner and made their way to the room of requirement. After a quite filling meal, courtesy of Dobby, the couple spent some quality time dancing to the soft music the wireless provided them with. "I'm sorry," Harry said through their bond as they swayed to the music. Ginny frowned. "For what?" she asked, genuinely curious. Harry sighed. "We didn't celebrate our anniversary last year. I was so caught up on it being the anniversary of my parents' deaths that I didn't even think about it being the day we got together." Ginny shook her head. "It's understandable, Harry. You didn't even know when they died until you came to Hogwarts. And since then, something's always come in the way of you truly mourning them." She smirked. "And, technically, we only got together early on the morning of November 1st. Harry stared at her, gobsmacked, until she huffed impatiently. He smiled slightly and nodded, leaning down to kiss her. "Thanks, Jen. I love you. You know that?" Ginny's smirk widened. "You know, I think I've heard that somewhere before." Somewhere. When it started to get late, Harry pulled out a small box and handed it to Ginny. She smiled and handed him a racked box of her own. He opened the present to find a leather belt. Engraved on the belt buckle was an impressively accurate depression of a phoenix. Its wings extended as if it were about to flame travel. Meanwhile, Ginny had opened her own gift to find a beautiful gold ring with a phoenix on top. The two chuckled a little. "Great minds think alike," Harry wondered, amused. Ginny snorted, slipping the ring onto her right hand. "Something like that." Harry kissed her and put all his feelings into the action. When they pulled apart, Ginny looked a little dazed. Harry smiled. "Come on. We should get back before curfew." Ginny nodded and followed him out of the room. End of chapter. Hi guys, hope you enjoyed that. Okay, so the Half-Blood Prince instead of the Horcruxes like I suspected. I'm not fussed. Anyway, also really sweet little day, and getting into Susan being a little jealous, which is understandable, frankly. Anyway, you guys know the drill. Like, comment and subscribe, and hit that bell to get notified for whenever I upload a new video. Have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Bye!